From Boca Raton, Florida, Rabbis Efrem Goldberg, Philip Moskowitz, and Josh Brody are taking you behind the Bima. The BRS rabbis schmooze about contemporary issues and talk to special guests who give a behind-the-scenes look at how they got to where they are and what keeps them going. Welcome to Behind the Bima.
Good evening. Wednesday, 9 p.m. I am your host, Rabbi Efrem Goldberg, joined by my colleague and dear friend back after a long break, Rabbi Josh Brody, and we are here to take you
behind the Bima. It is so great to be back.
Bima. First of all, it's great to have you back. It's great to have you say behind the Bima properly. We had a phenomenal guest co-host last week.
And what happened?
We ever had, the Rebbitzin. But when I teed her up for, and we're here to take you, she's like, behind the Bima. She was amazing. She was a fantastic host. In fact, I got the most feedback maybe I've ever gotten about I have to have her more often. Basically telling me, you stay home. She was great. So
maybe there's a spin-off show. Maybe there's like a
interesting
behind the Bima Rebbitzin edition or something.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna have to work on the exuberance and excitement for the behind the Bima.
Listen, it's taken years to perfect that. This is not didn't just
happen overnight. That's true. We can go back soon. We will go back because we are almost up to the 100th episode, and we are going to have big celebration, special guests, maybe a little trivia competition. We might even have people who share their favorite. In fact, we're going to invite our guests, our listeners, our audience to share their favorite moment on Behind the Bima. Not us. We don't need it. It's not our ego. The guests that we've had. We will have had almost 100 phenomenal, fascinating, diverse, across the spectrum guests. Tell us your favorite moments. What did you learn? What did you grow? How did you change? Who were you inspired by? What really spoke out to you? And we're looking forward to being able to have that. So you could talk about how you have worked on your pronunciation of behind the Bima.
And I'm looking for that super fan out there. I wonder if there are some super fans that just know so much about the history, know so much about the content of the show. Who are you? Let us know.
Sometimes you can be surprised. Somebody mentions that they watch or they listen. And, I just got an email, actually. I just got a beautiful email. Hi, Rabbi Goldberg. My name is so-and-so. I'm a bacher in the Mir Yeshiva in Yerushalayim. I listen to Behind the Bima. And I heard Alana Twig. I'd love, my family's coming. They want to visit her farm, Shemitah. It's great. You never know where, who, what the message is. So we'll let you know how you can share. And then we will play whatever message you leave for us. So you can share with others. What was that moment? So Rabbi Brody, you're back. You were on a little hiatus. Where were you? What were you up to? And what do you want to share from that experience?
Just so great. It was great being back in Israel, getting a chance to visit and see the kids. But you just spoke about the Shemitah. It's hard to drive down any of the highways in Israel without seeing these massive Keren HaShvius signs which say that this field or this farm is observing Shemitah. We didn't go to hers, but we went to another one. We got to see some of the magic.
Who was the we? Who'd you go with?
So I was there with my wife, the Rebbitzin, with Simone. And, Baruch Hashem, we have 6 children, but we really traveled for most of it just with our 2 kids, the 2 younger ones, because everyone else is busy doing their thing. And it was fun. It was fun just getting a chance to kind of see the country. It's our first 45 trips to Israel. I have everyone listed. One day when you make Aliyah, supposedly they ask you when did you go to Israel? So I have all the trips. This is the first time we've done a real family trip. So
really,
it was nice.
So the highlight was the farm. What was the highlight?
There were so many highlights. There's some. I mean, one of the every day was a highlight. I mean, just driving in Israel is a highlight for you know me. I'm not such a driving for me with Israelis is obviously not so simple. But everything, just living Israel was really special, as opposed to just waking up every day and trying to be on part of a tour or leading the tour. Here it's like, let's go to Minyan, let's go for a jog, let's go make breakfast. It's a different experience. So
amazing. And did you get to go to one of your heroes, the DAF with Rabbi?
That was actually one of the last days.
A Josh Brody DAF update.
The DAF update. So it was really special because I did get a chance to go see Eli behind the Bima, right? Literally, I was watching him from right opposite behind his Bima, and it's fascinating. It's so, I can't explain. It's almost like when you go to Disney World for the first time as a little kid, and you look up at that big castle, and as you get closer and closer, you realize maybe it's not as big in person as the dream you had, but it's so much more exciting and so much more powerful than anything you ever could have imagined. The Cheverschaft, the guys, the community that's built around it, and it's exciting. It's we're actually starting now, just so right? We spoke about this a little bit before, that every day it's a little bit more momentum, but we really are trying to build up a Boca group of guys to perhaps celebrate Siyums together, to come together weeknights, and even if it's watching the same thing on the same, in the same room in
Right.
locations.
Well, that's part of his magic, right? It's not just the way he gives the shiur. He created a community around the shiur. And I think there's lessons for all of us to learn without harping on or glorifying, mostly because he would like that too much. Eli Stefanski, I'm just joking. He's amazing. It's the cover of Ami magazine this week, what he's built and what he's done. But really, I think that sort of Rabbanim, Jewish community institutions should stop and analyze and learn and say, what went right here? Right? We're trying to engage people. We're trying to draw people in. We want people to feel connected. We want them to learn what's he doing right. It's a case study, right? When in graduate schools and business school, you're trying to learn in management school. So the best way to learn is with case study. So if you take the MDY as a case study, you could do the same, by the way, with Rav Elyada Goldberg and Smichas Chaver. Rav Elyada tapped into something incredible with Smichas Chaver. He chased after me, tried to recruit me to teach it in our community. Not on anything special, but he was trying to spread it around and get it started. I hesitated. I avoided. I was reluctant. And actually, there were guys in the community who pushed. We got it started. It's one of the most rewarding things that I do. Wake up early every Sunday morning. You know how many guys there are at 7:45 a.m. for an hour and 15-minute shiur? And then a bechina, a test on it, and a siyum. Again, a lot of the same things. There's community, there's camaraderie, there's a sense of accomplishment, there's continuity. So there's several case studies we could be looking at, be it Stefanski and MDY, be it Rav Elyada Goldberg and Smichas Chaver, and to look at the Daf Yomi as a whole and just say, what's the next thing? How do we learn from it? And what's the next thing we can do?
Someone even said yesterday, or I think it was yesterday's shiur, they said, because he starts out every morning, good morning, Rabbi Sai, and then and then he shows little clips or videos of children doing it every single day. So someone said, imagine what that's going to sound like at the Siyam Hashas. Now, obviously, he hasn't been asked to speak. He hasn't been, but everyone knows it's going to happen. It's just like a light bulb went off. Of course, someone's going to say it. The whole 100,000 people are going to participate. But I think one of the things that he does, which is something we could all learn from, and there's many different pieces here, but is that he really encourages the participants to go out and get more people to join. So like with Smichas Chaver, that you activate these guys and you say, you love this, you're so into it. Bring 5 of your friends to the next one.
Well, so there's an interesting question that comes out of this, and it could be a bigger question. We've discussed it before. And by the way, the 100th episode, we're looking forward to and hoping to have all the hosts back together. But it is an interesting question because Stefanski himself, when he was on Behind the Bima, we spoke about he's shameless, and it's not his ego. It's really about the Torah, and he's willing to do anything, even appear like ego, in order to grow Torah. But meaning a person has to be willing to do that. When you recruit and solicit and push and sponsor and send free Gemaras and create a whole community and one might say a cult around it, you have to be willing to do that. And so there's always that question. I don't think I've shared this publicly, but I'm regularly debating. Baruch Hashem, Bli Ayin Hara, it's the greatest privilege of my life, aside from being a husband, a father, a grandfather. But teaching Torah is the greatest privilege. Sharing Torah, teaching Torah, promoting Torah, trying to inspire myself and others with Torah. And Baruch Hashem, thanks to technology, the internet, we've been able to do it. Everything that we do has grown organically. Behind the Bima, Parsha Perspectives, Living with Emunah, turn Friday into Erev Shabbos Kol, everything that we do. So the question is, if you put a little money into it, people ask, what's the marketing budget?
Right.
We've never spent one penny. We never spent one penny on a guest for Behind the Bima. We don't spend one penny on promoting Behind the Bima, sponsored Behind the Bima, getting it optimized. I don't even know the terms of how to grow the audience of any of these things. Maybe we should, not Behind the Bima, but take shiurim where we're teaching real Torah. Maybe we should. But then there's that yucky, awkward feeling of, really, am I investing money in promoting myself? Is that ego? Whoever trips upon the shiur will trip on the shiur. But is it ego that's saying we want to grow the numbers, get more people reading, downloading the newsletter, reading the Parsha Perspective write-up?
Yeah.
What's
imagine if like your Tefillah Insights, or not Tefillah Insights,
Siddur Snippets,
right? siddur snippets that you put together some form of like a workbook or something.
Right.
And you say to everyone that's participating, get this in the hands of 10 people.
Right.
So it's not about you. It's about the Torah. Like this past week when you were talking about Shemona Esrei, right? And you're talking about the 3 steps back and the 3 steps forward, and the three people in Jewish history that's supposed to remind us of, and Vayigash. You don't realize. I mean, you do realize, but maybe you don't. You realize that changes the people that are listening. It changes their davening forever.
So it's interesting you raised that. So first of all, shameless plug. We just started the Amida, the introduction on Esrei. There are almost 400 snippets, but you can go on this and you can get it delivered right on WhatsApp. You could listen on a podcast player, but you could sign up rabbiefremgoldberg.org/siddur, 2 Ds, rabbiefremgoldberg.org/siddur. But it's a good question you raised, right? Meaning you put out a book, you put out a sefer. So the publisher is spending marketing money. So the biggest names we know, the people we admire incredibly, let's take Rabbi Frand. We admire. Nobody thinks he's a bad guy in the least. Rabbi Frand is incredibly modest. He's an anav. He's a talmid chacham. He's a tzaddik. But ArtScroll's taking out ads in newspapers selling Rabbi Frand on the parsha, Rabbi Frand's Tshuva drushes, and nobody's like, wow, he's promoting himself. He lets his book be sold. But yet, if somebody would say, we'll take that same marketing money and instead of putting it in a newspaper, we'll use the technology online to get people to read Rabbi Frand's weekly parsha thing on the website, then you might be like, really, So maybe this is only in my head. Maybe I got to get over this. I don't know.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people that could benefit from your Torah. No, I was thinking out loud.
Don't make it about me. Let's talk generic.
And they just don't know. It's different if someone says, listen, I gave it a shot. It wasn't for me. It's another thing to say, there's a lot of people out there that may be interested if you just put it in front of them. They just know about it.
I live with this, and I'll tell you that I've spoken to a lot of people that I admire and respect who are struggling with this question. Without violating it with confidence, but a previous Behind the Bima guest, Charlie Harari, my cousin David Beshefkin, or others, and say, what do you say? Like, look, I put it out there, and then it should just grow organically. Whoever Hashem wants to fall on it, and trip on it, and discover it. And when do you say, no, the same way that like you put out a flyer, you promote a shir, and that's not about you. We are in the business of drawing people closer to Hashem's Torah, inspiring, teaching. So if the work's already going in to do a 6-minute snippet every day, and my amid is growing and your davening is growing, not because of me, it's the Torah of the other people. So then, let's try to have as many people as possible grow at 6 minutes a day in Torah. So I don't know. I'm still struggle all the time with this. I'm not over that hump. Aside from the fact that I don't know where the money's coming from to market, it's not exactly in a shul budget, and I don't know who it's fair to ask to have that money. But it's a question. We have a pleasure this evening. We're going to bring on Dan Grunfeld in a moment. But first, Rabbi Brody, you want to tell us about that shirt? Is this your Garth Brooks invitation? What's going on here today?
It's not Garth Brooks. Let me tell you something. I was in a meeting this afternoon with some of my incredible friends from Project Inspire. These guys are serious guys. These guys are like the best in the outreach world. I was like, you know what? Do I come in? Do I go with the classic white shirt, put on the nice suit pants? Or do I go with this new look? The black jeans, the black shirt. When I say new, it's very new. You've seen it for the last 2 days. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going all in on this look.
You're going all in on the look.
They didn't say anything, but
in the Kirov world, you can go all in on that look because it's like, you're trying to relate and be. There's nothing wrong with the look, not to criticize, judge. There's nothing wrong with any look. Feel free to be yourself, but you can definitely go. You can go all in on it. One of the interesting things, just a little behind the Bima trivia as we approach the 100th episode, will be a fun thing for someone to track what Rabbi Brody wore on every episode. Because one thing I can tell you, I wore on every episode this big yarmulke, a white shirt, and a tie. But do you remember the days, Rabbi Brody, like when we had Aaron Cutler, you were with a suit and a black hat. Then we had someone from Israel, you wearing like a white kippah sruga. Then we you used to like a chameleon, you would adapt
Jew
each episode.
Right.
So you never know what you're gonna find.
The good old days.
The good old days. Well, Dan Grunfeld, father, incredible Ernie Grunfeld, the great New York Knicks player, executive announcer, his grandmother, amazing Holocaust survivor. Dan in his own right, tremendous, beautiful life story. And I learned that the Grunfelds are actually mishpacha, they're cousins of a member of ours, Bob Strauss, our beloved dear friend Bob Strauss, a member here at BRS, is a cousin of Grunfeld. I think Bob's father and Ernie Grunfeld's father, or Bob and Ernie Grunfeld's father, were first cousins. But cousin, Mishpacha, there you have it. But Dan's written a great book, By the Grace of the Game. Fascinating. If this interview, this conversation, you don't have to have heard of basketball. Frankly, Rabbi Brody doesn't even know how to play basketball. You don't have to know or care about sports. You just have to care about life, and the Jewish people, and our history, and our destiny. So we are very excited to be able to welcome Dan Grunfeld. We have the great pleasure of being joined by Dan Grunfeld, author of By the Grace of the Game, The Holocaust, the Basketball Legacy, and an Unprecedented American Dream. Really a fantastic read, a stimulating read, and a read that's thought-provoking, not only, Dan, for your life, but it's sort of a mirror that we hold up to our lives about our family narrative, our background, our challenges, where we need to persevere. And so we're really grateful for a fantastic, fantastic book. Thank you.
Thank you so much for saying that.
So we got a lot to unpack here. There's so much in that book and so much to talk about. Dan, you are a two-time academic All-American at Stanford, played 8 professional seasons, top leagues around the world. We'll get to Germany, Spain, 4 in Israel, short stint in the NBA. MBA now, you're working in Silicon Valley, I believe. You're working in high tech. You've been an author and published in Sports Illustrated, Huffington Post, Jerusalem Post, and so much else. So we could talk for hours, but we're going to try to narrow it in and sort of follow the outline that you do in the book, where you broke it up into 3 chapters and more than 3 chapters, but 3 vantage points, and you weave them together. And that is your grandmother, your father, and of course you. But we're going to go out of order. And with your permission, we're going to start with your dad. So I grew up in the New York area. Anyone who followed the Knicks fan, knew your dad's name. Obviously a player, an exec, accomplished. But they don't know, I didn't know your dad's story. It doesn't seem like he wore that on his sleeve or spoke about it, didn't come up in interviews. You say in the book that your father is the only player in NBA history whose parents were Holocaust survivors. And his own story is fascinating. Born in Romania, 8 years old, immigrated to the United States, and learns to play basketball in Queens. And he goes from this immigrant who doesn't speak English to 10 years later being a gold medalist. Wow. And one of the most famous names in the NBA and NBA history. So how did that happen? How did your dad discover the basketball court, and what did the basketball court do for him?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, my book is called By the Grace of the Game, right? And the details you just mentioned kind of explain why. My dad came to this country, like you said. He spoke fluent Hungarian, Romanian, and Italian, didn't speak a word of English. He was made fun of by kids in New York City, right, for not speaking the language, for being a fish out of water. My dad had an older brother when they got to the United States, and what my dad called my uncle in their native language, Hungarian, translates to English as my king. That's how much my dad revered and looked up to his older brother. And my uncle was diagnosed with leukemia not long after arriving in the United States, and he passed away within a year. And so that was the
name, right? Is that your middle name?
Yes,
Are you named after
my
him?
middle name is after my uncle, and as you know from my book, I carry that with me, that history. I take it very seriously. It's an obligation that I have to the past, but that's just a crushing loss for my family. And so my dad did what all the other kids in New York City were doing, as he describes it. He went to the local park to play hoops, and I think he was, the game moved him away from so much tragedy, right? Not only losing so much family in the Holocaust, but also losing his brother. And so the game of basketball really appeared and shined its light on him when he needed it. And as you said, he wasn't long before he became an All-American, was an Olympian, and my grandparents, who both survived the Holocaust, got to be there in attendance and watch him become a gold medalist for the United States. So really, surreal trajectory. And that's why I wrote the book.
That is incredible. And basketball in many ways it's not just an escape in an unhealthy sense, as many substances are. It's a healthy escape, right? Because, as somebody who likes to, I never obviously played professionally or amateur sports, but who enjoys playing
Not
sport.
yet.
With all the stress and pressure you have, not yet, exactly. I'm waiting for the senior tour. With all the pressure and stress you have in life, the second you're on a court or you're competing, you can't be thinking of anything else. You have to be focused on that ball or your opponent or defense or whatever game you're playing. So, you described coming and being an immigrant and living under the shadow of the Holocaust, and with all that loss and his brother, that basketball becomes that escape, but you're sinking yourself into something. It's healthy, physically, mentally, competitive. It's bringing out good things in you. So do you think that basketball played that role for you too? Or, do you have anything to say about sports in general as a healthy outlet?
Absolutely. It's an incredible outlet, right? It's a great sense of community. And that's what it was for my dad, right? He made friends, he learned the language. And basketball, language is a theme throughout the book, right? Because my dad came to America not speaking the language, but then he found basketball, and that ball is a universal language. Doesn't care what country you come from, what language you speak, what color your skin is, it brings people together. And so he's the ultimate example of that. It happened in my life as well. I have lifelong friends who that ball, that game connected me with. And so, and like you said, it's healthy, it's active, it's stimulating, it's competitive, it's fun. So for all those reasons, sports, basketball, but sports in general, is just a great unifier, right? And there are so many things in the world now that we see people being torn apart. Sports brings you together, and certainly basketball has been that force for my family, and it's that force for people around the world. So I can't underestimate the power of sports to change lives, to bring people together.
It's healthy. Rabbi Brody, we'll explain to you what basketball is later, how it works.
I appreciate
I'd be
that.
happy to do that. I'll do a full tutorial. You'll like it. It's a good game.
They'll need it. They'll need it.
Listen, I just need a few more feet. That's the
There you go.
little challenge on the vertical
Nice.
side.
I always tell people, you don't need to be tall, but it helps.
For sure.
Did he have to break into that community, or did they welcome him into that community?
I think both. I think that he had to find his way, and he always says, especially in the neighborhood that he grew up in, once he came to the United States, Forest Hills, Queens. If you could play ball in the neighborhood, that's how you got respect. And that's how you made friends. So I could look at him and say, well, you must have made a lot of friends, because sometimes things just click. And I don't think he would have flown so far so fast had he not been moving away from all that tragedy. But it just was a great fit for him. He loved the game. He was competitive. My grandparents, Holocaust survivors, who had this maniacal work ethic, and he learned that from them, this toughness, this discipline. And so it took him a while to find his footing, but once he did, he was embraced. He became a legend in the neighborhood, but at first people made fun of him, so again, by the grace of the game, it didn't take him long until he was the one kind of, controlling the park that, he used to kind of have trouble fitting in at.
Right, and here he was with his college career, University of Tennessee, drafted by the Milwaukee Bucks, 77, played for the Kansas City Kings, ultimately the New York Knicks. I think he's most associated or synonymous with the New York Knicks, managed teams, executives, some radio broadcasting. He wore number 18, symbolism of wearing the number 18.
Absolutely, of course.
Wow.
I mean, we know what that means in Judaism, right? That's high. And my dad is the only Jewish player to ever wear number 18 for the Knicks. He's as you said, the only NBA player whose parents are Holocaust survivors. And so, yeah, he picked that number 18 very intentionally.
And you had a line in the book. You said, quote, a yeshiva in Queens once denied him admission for not speaking English, and now he was being recruited to announce games on New York radio for the beloved Knicks. So yeshiva really didn't let him in because he didn't know the language well enough?
Solomon Schechter in the Bronx. Yeah, so when they came to the United States, that's what my grandparents knew, right? There were Orthodox Jews in Europe, and so they wanted him to go to a yeshiva. And he went, and they interviewed him, whatever that means, but he couldn't speak the language and say, we can't let your kid in. So he went to PS 101 in Queens, because the yeshiva in the Bronx wouldn't let him in. And then he eventually, found the game, became a New York Knicks player. And then after he retired, the Knicks hired him ultimately to announce games on the radio in English, of course, because, he spoke perfect English.
Tremendous irony. So the great Ernie Grunfeld. So he didn't speak about it. Was that a conscious decision that he wasn't going to be sort of, the Jew on the court or this survivor or child of survivors of the Holocaust? Did he suppress that intentionally? Was it not sort of a safe space to be able to share that part of who he was? Or was it just incidental that here he was focused on competing, on basketball, on excelling, on growing professionally? Why do you think he didn't speak about it more?
I think that the basketball court, it's a great equalizer, right? Everyone has a background, everyone has a story. There are always things that push you, that motivate you. And once you're on between those lines, you play the game. And I think that that's how he always approached it. I think off the court, because he was such a public figure, there were more opportunities to talk about it. But I think, and as you know from reading the book, basketball's wins and losses, but this story is life and death. Right. These are really hard themes, really hard things. He was born from the ashes of the Holocaust, essentially, fled his homeland under duress, lost his brother. And then here came, basketball came around and everything changed. And so, I talk a lot in my book about privilege, and I'm privileged for a lot of different reasons. One of those reasons that I have a generation of separation from all that tragedy and trauma. So I can look back on it, reflect upon it, learn from it. He never really had that luxury.
Like a lot of survivors didn't talk about it. And I guess, even as an immigrant, since he was an extension of that survivor, and it made sense he didn't speak about it. Rabbi Brody, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, first of all, you could talk about it subliminally or if it was very overt, the 18. But I know that if I knew that there was a Jewish player wearing an 18, You know, that's like a yarmulke. I mean, you've got something on there, and it's just exciting. I know that's our code word. You know, that's our guy on the court. Did he go around and speak and inspire kids just to, because they were so excited that there was another, you know, landsman. There was someone from the tribe that was on a team like that.
He did. He did. He was, active in the community. I know he spoke internationally. I know when he was playing for the Knicks, he did a basketball clinic for kids in Budapest in Hungarian. They weren't all Jewish kids, but it certainly mattered to him. I have had people since the book came out write to me that, oh, your dad came to the JCC in Knoxville when he was playing for Tennessee. I didn't know
Wow.
that. Those aren't things that he talks about, but I think behind the scenes, he did things like that. I mean, obviously, just making that decision to wear 18, right?
Yeah.
His history matters to him. His faith and culture matter to him, and so he walked that walk.
Are you more proud of your dad's accomplishments on the court or off the court? Which one do you think is more impressive?
Wow, I'm enormously proud of both. I think that what he did as a player is remarkable. I mean, he was a legend in high school, a legend in college, had such a strong NBA career. Then you look at his career as an executive, right? He was 30 years as a general manager. And as you know from the story, to have come to the United States with nothing, son of Holocaust survivors, not speaking the language, and then not only to be such a tremendous athlete, but then a tremendous executive, right? And that's a businessman. That's a leader. And my dad he has amazing instincts for how to manage, how to lead, how to deal with people. Of course, knows the game of basketball so well. And I'm a very proud son. Both of those areas of his life, I couldn't be more proud of the success he's had.
Have they been back? Have they been back to Europe to visit the camps and see their old community?
They being my grandparents?
Yeah.
So my grandparents have been back to Romania, to their village that they fled, but they fled as refugees. It wasn't happy. They were more than a decade under communism there, and so it wasn't a happy trip. And my dad has not been back to Romania since they fled. And my dad was pat down by the communists and screamed at by the communists as he boarded a train to leave his homeland, right? And so again, that wasn't a happy departure either. He's certainly been to Europe. He's been all over the world with basketball, but not back to Romania.
Have you been on the March of the Living or a program like that where they take you back to the camps? And
I haven't visited the camps. I've been also around the world, and I visited Holocaust memorials in different countries around the world, but I haven't visited the camps. I think, the trip that I really need to make is to Budapest, because that's where my grandmother survived the Holocaust. That's where Raoul Wallenberg saved her life twice. She was in the ghetto there, as you know. And so I will make the trip to Budapest. I will visit those sites. I will visit Auschwitz one day. That'll be very hard. That's where all of my dad's grandparents were killed.
Wow.
It's where the majority of my grandmother's family, my grandfather's family were killed. And so that's going to be a hard trip, but an important one.
Rabbi Brody's led countless trips of teens. How many times have you gone?
14 trips back.
There were 14 times. I've been there 4 or 5 times. Recently led a trip a few summers ago with members of our synagogue before Corona, about 40 adults. Many of them were second generation. And, simultaneous to living the pain of walking through those same camps and those hallowed grounds where they lost loved ones and reciting the Kelmale, the memorials, and saying the Kaddish, so powerful. On the one hand, it's so raw and it rips open scars and scabs. There's pain, but there's also the sense of triumph. Like, here we are and we're thriving, and there's a state of Israel, and there are Jewish families and Jewish continuity, and Hitler and the Nazis are gone. They're a distant memory, and here we are. It's really something very, very powerful. And we actually are planning, my wife's grandparents were from Hungary, and we're planning, please God, at some point when the time will be right, a follow-up trip, open not only to the people who came with us to Poland, but also to continue to see that story as it played out later, but in Hungary as well. But Dan, I want to ask you about ESPN 30 for 30, Bernard King and your dad, Ernie Grunfeld. Talk about Bernard King, if you will, that relationship here. You have 2 very different, diverse people, diverse backgrounds. You wouldn't necessarily land them in the same 30 for 30 episode if not knowing that relationship that they had. What did that relationship mean to your dad early in his career? And what does Bernard King mean to you even today?
We talked about the game of basketball as a unifier, and my dad and Bernard are such a great example of that, right? They're from the same city, but they're from very different places. Bernard was from the projects in Brooklyn. My dad was from the working class immigrant neighborhood in Queens, and they went down to Knoxville, Tennessee, and the basketball brought them together, and they became legends in Tennessee separately and together. They were called the Ernie and Bernie Show one of the greatest duos in college basketball history. I read about it in the book, and they documented in the 30 for 30 on ESPN called Bernie and Ernie. It's a very special story. And they also played in the NBA together, for the Knicks. And so Bernard lived up the street from us. And so I would come home from school and see Bernard there. I can even tell you that today, when I was talking to my dad, we were just chatting, and he said, "Oh yeah, I talked to Bernard today." And so that's how close they are. This is all those years later, and they talk every month. Bernard, I call him Uncle B. He texted me a month or two ago just telling me he was so proud of me for this book and the story it tells. And so I think it's a very special story. And it also is symbolic of what we've been talking about the power of basketball and sports to build bridges, to heal wounds for people individually, right? Both those guys had complicated histories, but the game was a salve for both of them. And then it also united them, but not only at the time, for decades, right? Our families are very close. As I mentioned, Bernard and I are very close. And it's a beautiful relationship. And we all have the game of basketball to thank for it.
That's amazing. So one more question on your dad before we turn. And it's a really behind the beams question, so you can take a pass if you want. It's hard to grow up in the shadow of a celebrity, of somebody larger than life, of an accomplished athlete, executive on every stage, on the big stage of the hardwood of New York, and then back in the office and business. In every arena he's excelled. Is it hard to grow up in such a shadow? Does it create certain expectations for yourself, for others put on you? Do you measure yourself against having such a dad? Is that a complicated childhood? And I share that not to get too personal with you, but also for everyone to listen and to learn, for other people who maybe their parents aren't as famous, but in their own way struggle to figure out where they fit in.
Yeah, it's funny because I was thinking, if I'm passing on a question, it's got to be really, really, really deep, because you read my book, right? I'm very honest, very open, and I'll be that way here too. There are incredible perks growing up with that kind of background. We did really fun things, always going to Knick practices and Knick playoff games and NBA All-Star games. And not only are they cool experiences, but they're really meaningful to do as a family, right? So it brought our family really close together, it brought me very close to my dad. But there are drawbacks too. And there are things that are really hard about it. And I'm very honest about it in the book. All the pressure, I always felt that people were assuming things about me, and that, any success I had on the basketball court, I didn't earn, right? It was given. And listen, and I own my privilege and the opportunities that I did have. And those things, it's 100% true. But at the same time, between the lines on the basketball court, you really do have to earn your keep. And I think it really put a chip on my shoulder to outwork people, not only on the court, but off the court. And so you mentioned I was a 2-time academic All-American at Stanford, which of course I'm very proud of, but that happened, there was a lot of elbow grease, a lot of hard work that made that happen. I think part of it was that determination and that motivation I got from feeling judged and feeling the pressure to kind of live up to what people thought I should be because of who my dad was.
It must be complicated, but you're accomplished in your own right. And the truth is, no matter who your dad is, that doesn't make the ball go in the basket, right? You still have to get it in there.
You got to put the ball. Yeah, if you're playing hoops, again, like, ball don't lie, like, between the lines, you have to earn your keep, and that's what I always tried to do.
So let's talk about your grandmother, who's really the hero of the book in many ways. And as impressive your dad, each a story of perseverance in its own right. You point this out in the book, pales, so to say, in comparison to her life story, what she endured and the precedent and what she passed on to you, the power of perseverance. So, share with our listeners a little bit about that story. She lost, I know, 5 siblings, a total of 70 family members, which is unimaginable. She grew up in a large Orthodox family in rural Romanian village near the Hungarian border. Did I read correctly? With connections to Satmar? Was she connected even to Satmar in her youth? And here the Nazis come in, and she's 18 years old, and it changes her life. She's saved by Hapoel Holon. So give us a little synopsis of her story, so we could talk a little bit more about her.
Absolutely. As you said, my dad was this big basketball star, and I had a nice career, but my grandmother is the star of our family. She's certainly the star of this story. She is not only our hero, she's a hero. She risked her life to save others during the Holocaust. My family's from Satmar. That's where my dad is born and raised. And so, Rabbi Joel Teitelbaum, who's very famous from, leaving Romania, coming to Brooklyn. He blessed my grandmother in her childhood kitchen, I think in the 1920s, before maybe the early 30s, before the war. And so, yeah, my dad is from Satmar. My grandmother, is from a village very, very close to Sudmar on the in Transylvania, on the border of Romania and Hungary. Grew up in a happy home, 10 siblings, including her, 2 loving parents, beautiful Orthodox home. And I write in pretty vivid detail about what her childhood was like, because we know the numbers of the Holocaust, right? But these weren't just numbers, they were people. They were my grandmother's loved ones. And, my grandmother's 97. She lives in the Bay Area. I just spent a week with her. She's doing incredibly well.
Amazing.
I always tell, when I talk to groups of youngsters about this book, we learn about the Holocaust in history class, but it's really important to know that it wasn't that long ago and it wasn't that far away. And so I wanted to recreate that in the book and let them know, like, these were people, these were human beings just like us. And so, my grandmother had a chance to survive on the run during the war because she happened to be visiting an older sister in Budapest when the Nazis invaded. She was able to obtain a Schutz pass from Raoul Wallenberg. That's when she risked her life. She got 17 passes for other people. She was eventually caught and put in the Budapest ghetto and narrowly avoided a massacre at the end of the war. And again, the book goes into great detail about what happened in the ghetto and how she survived. But it took her 40 years to learn that it was Wallenberg who saved her a second time. Wow. So, he's one of the greatest heroes of the war. And the Holocaust Museum in DC is on Raoul Wallenberg Way. And, my grandmother is one of the lucky ones who was saved by him. And so we wouldn't be having this conversation if not for Wallenberg. But yeah, like you said, there were 5 siblings. There were 10 total siblings. 5 of them were killed in the Holocaust, both of my grandmother's parents as well.
Did she talk about it when you were growing up? Did you know about it? Or was this process of the book really getting into it with her?
She talked about it. Yeah. It's often a binary with Holocaust survivors. Either they don't want to talk about it or they feel an obligation. And my grandmother was in the latter camp. She would always tell stories about her father, who was, they were so close. And my son is named after my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was Solomon, and my firstborn son is Solomon. And my grandma would always talk about him and, talk about what happened in the war, but in an age-appropriate way. So when I was 7 and 10 years old, she would share the details that were appropriate. But as I got older and, I went to Stanford as an undergrad, and my grandmother lives 25 minutes from campus. So she came to every single home game I played. Right. I remember sitting at her kitchen table during the summer with a notebook and just asking her questions. I was just always interested. I wanted to know the specifics about what happened. And she has an incredible memory even to this day. And that's why you've read the book. There's a lot of texture. There's really rich, vivid detail. It's because of my grandmother. What she remembers and what she's willing to recount is it's incredible. And it really contributed to me telling a really deep and meaningful story. But, I'm lucky that she's always communicated about what happened.
Have you ever met the Satmar Hasidim? Have you gone back to try and engage them as a Satmar Hasid yourself?
Well, I haven't formally. When I played professionally in Israel, some of my professional basketball, some of my Israeli teammates would make mention, because there are different parts of the wardrobe that signify where you're from, and so there would be some Satmar Hasidim that would be pointed out to me, but I've never made any formal attempt to connect with the community.
Oh, they're going to attempt now.
Hey, man, listen, we don't shy away from our past. It's all in the book.
Great.
This is where my dad was born and raised, right? He was raised in Satmar. That's
who knows? Who knows if it's the bracha, the blessing of the Satmar Rebbe in Satmar. Maybe that set your dad on his illustrious career. Who knows?
It could be. And listen, another part of the book is, I mentioned my uncle. My uncle got sick and passed, and when my grandmother, of course, was so heartbroken when my uncle got the diagnosis. Through a mutual friend, she reached out to Rabbi Teitelbaum, and she said, "Hey, this is what's happening to my son. What can you do anything to help?" And he said, "I'm so sorry. There's nothing that I can do." But so she not only met him in her childhood home before the war, she reconnected with him in New York City to try to help when my uncle was terminally ill.
You know how many Jewish Knicks fans probably never would dream in a million years the connection between Ernie Grunfeld and the Satmar Rebbe Rabbi Eilish. That in itself is wild.
That's why I wrote the book. I always grew up saying, man, this is a wild, big story, and I think it's a relatable one that needs to be told.
100%. Breaking news. 100%. So your grandmother remembers all these vivid details. Obviously, life changed for survivors. She, after the war there, and then ultimately migrating and coming here. Anything you could share with us about your grandmother's continued connection to Judaism, to faith, to Israel. She grew up in that Satmar background and had that observant upbringing. Is there a holiday? Is there her favorite Hungarian foods? Is there part of her faith, her relationship with God? I'm sure is complicated as it is for so many survivors. Anything to share about your grandmother in terms of her faith and the holidays and the like?
Yeah, well, listen, the food is a huge part of my family. It's a huge part of our relationship, and I write so much about her food in the
Right.
book. She happens to be the best cook in the world, but it's also a vessel of love. The meals that she cooks for me to this day. I was just with her last week eating this food. They're the meals that her mom made for their family before the majority of them were killed in
Sure.
Auschwitz, right?
What's your
So
listen?
that
I told you my wife's grandparents are Hungarian, so I know. What's your favorite Hungarian food? What's your favorite?
it's got to be Rantatush. That's like the breaded chicken. It's like schnitzel, but whatever my grandma does to it, it's magic. She makes delicious vineta, eggplant dishes, so many soups, mezlevesh, sour cherry soup.
Right.
Listen, I love my grandmother's food, so much. It's my favorite cuisine. I, she's still like, Judaism is such a huge part of her life. The faith, the community, and like you said, with Holocaust survivors, it's complicated, but nonetheless, the culture, the community, it's still very strong presence in her life. She's fasted. I think she'll say 87 straight years on Yom Kippur.
Wow.
So she still fasts to this day. She fasts on Yom Kippur. So yeah, it's still a big part of who she is.
Please God, for many more years. You share in the book, hold on, Rabbi, we'll get to you in 1 second, but you share in a very moving section about when she went home in January 45 to her ransacked childhood home, and she found something that you now have.
I have it with me. I actually, I had just traveled from California to the East Coast and I brought it with me. So, the house was looted, and my great grandfather, may he rest in peace, was a successful landowner. They had crops and they had animals and all these things, and everything was gone after the war. The house was empty, completely looted. And in the back of one of the drawers in the kitchen, my grandmother found an old metallic serving spoon that my great grandmother used to serve milk, right? Because it was a kosher house. So it was a milk spoon. And it was really all my grandma had left. And so she grabbed it, she held it to her heart and she kept it for 75 years. She gifted it to me not long ago. And then I write in the book, I keep it in my bedside drawer near where I sleep. And it's true, right? It's talk about priceless. I mean, it really is. It's a spoon. It's a metallic serving spoon, but the meaning behind that is so profound.
Huge.
Wow. Just talking about the meaning behind something, I'm wondering, your grandmother, when she sees your dad making the New York Knicks, and now he's on TV and he's all over the place, obviously a massive amount of pride. Now you make, at some point, you're playing for the state of Israel on different teams. What's bigger to her? It's the Knicks, which is great. It's America, but listen, you got Israel.
I don't think she compares the two. I just think she celebrates them both, and I think they're both really special trajectories. I mean, for my dad, what he did, it just came out of nowhere for my grandparents. And, I write about it in the book, where they didn't even see him play basketball until he was a junior in high school. He was already one of the best players in New York City. They knew he was playing basketball a lot, but they had opened up a fabric store in the Bronx, and they were working 6-7 days a week to build a life, right? These are Holocaust survivors, immigrants in New York City. And so once they found out what was happening, my grandfather barely missed a game, but they just didn't know. And then they blinked their eyes, and he's just this phenomenon, this sensation. He's on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He's an Olympic gold medalist. And so that was just kind of this unthinkable thing that happened because of basketball. And again, by the grace of the game, and then for me, I grew up so differently. My dad was the player for the Knicks when I was born. He was the general manager of the Knicks growing up. And so basketball was always in my plans, right? It didn't come out of nowhere. It was everywhere for me. But at the same time, I fulfilled my childhood dream of playing at Stanford. I had a successful professional career. And then to finish my career in Israel, to play for the team in Jerusalem, right? That was all very cool, very meaningful and special too. So I don't think my grandmother would ever measure one against the other. I just think she would celebrate both of them.
That is that story, that circle that you just completed. It is an amazing circle, from your mom running in Budapest, her life being saved, losing 70 family members, struggling and fighting to survive, to fast forward, aside from having a celebrated son, a grandson play for the state of Israel.
Right.
What a vindication, what a triumph, what a story.
No pressure on your kids.
Yeah,
You have two sons, Dan. What happens if it turns out they're not athletic? How are you going to deal
Listen,
with that?
whatever they want to do, and honestly, my parents never forced basketball on me, and I won't do it to my boys at all. But listen, again, this is why I wrote the book. And I remember before my games in Israel, right, Hatikva would play, and I would always get chills because basketball is bigger than just a game for us because of what it did, because of the future it enabled, and the wounds that it helped heal. So for all those reasons, the game has just been so instrumental in our lives. And again, I'm so proud to share the story through this book because it's one that has needed to been told.
Can you talk to us about the process of writing the book? And I don't mean, did you sit down and how many words a day did you write? I mean, did you hesitate? Maybe your grandmother, maybe it would really open up wounds. Maybe it would be hard for her to have these conversations. Maybe putting this all out there for your whole family and for her in particular, is private. So can you talk about, were you concerned or worried? Did you hesitate? And how did you overcome that? Why did you decide nonetheless to publish it? And to extrapolate out a little bit bigger, how important is it for people to know their own family narrative? How important is it for everybody to take a deep dive into where you come from and to take the time to research and find the stories? And maybe not all of us are going to publish the book or do the interviews that you've been doing, but maybe for all of us, there's an enormous amount to gain from doing that deep dive into our own family background.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, my book has really resonated. It's done well, and it's moved people. And I think the reason is because it's truly something that's produced from the heart. This is a story that, sometimes stories just you have to tell them. So when you say like there wasn't much of a decision because it was something that I had to get out. And I think that's why the book has done as well as it's done, and the story has resonated in the way it has because it's told from a very authentic place. And so I never said to my grandmother or my dad, I'm going to write our story. What I said to them is, I wrote our story. So I did a year and a half of research. I talked to them every day. I recorded those conversations. I transcribed them. I didn't exactly tell them what I had in mind. I said, I want to memorialize their history. I have a project, but I think I needed to create some space for them to be very open and honest, but also for me to kind of process this history. And so I did the research. I wrote the book. I was working on it for years before I had a first draft done where I was able to tell them I wrote it, and then the decision making started coming in. And I said, are you comfortable? And they were supportive. It's very hard for both of them, particularly for my dad, because basketball's taken him away from this history. But I think they both very clearly identified that this is an important story, not only for our family, but kind of a little bit more broadly. And so they were 100% supportive. And to the second part of your question, I always, when I talk to groups, I encourage people, especially younger people, know your history. You don't have to write it, right? I love to write, so I wrote a book. Just know it. Ask your grandparents, ask your parents. Particularly for the Jewish people, we share this history, right? Whether it's the Holocaust or what, we've all been through these trials and tribulations. We've all experienced anti-Semitism. We all know what these journeys are like, and so I 100% think it's super important to know it. That's the first part of it. Know where you come from. Be proud of where you come from. Be proud of who you are. Then, if you like to write, if you like to make documentary films, go for it. Right? Definitely go for it. But first and foremost, just know it.
Yeah, there's research that actually shows that what gives the strength and the capacity for perseverance is knowing your family narrative. And what's interesting about the research, I think it was done out of Duke, is that it's not just if you know that you have a wonderful family narrative, that doesn't make you as strong and if you know that you have a terrible one, that also the most powerful family narrative to be exposed to or aware of that helps you the most is what they call the oscillating family narrative, which yours is, right? The
Very much
downs
so.
and the ups, the sacrifice, the struggle, and the perseverance and the triumph. And if you know that that's in your background and it's in your DNA, then it gives, and that's really the theme of the book is that oscillating family narrative and where you're at. And what a great gift that you're giving your sons, that you've done that hard work and that they just have to read. They don't have to do the research, but they'll know where they come from. Is there talk about taking this book to the next level, maybe producing a movie or maybe something bigger about your dad's story, your grandmother's story, your story?
Yeah, we're in conversations right now to do it for movies and or a movie, and which is amazing. And this is not a commercial endeavor for me. As I just told you, I just wrote it. And actually how books like this usually happen is you have an idea, you put a proposal together, then with that proposal you get an agent, then the agent sells that idea to a publisher, then you write it. That's the normal process. I worked with a professor at Stanford, a writing professor, and we talked about the story, and he could sense how much it meant to me. And he was like, you know what? You can write, and this means the world to you. Write your book and figure it all out later. So I did it backwards. I just wrote the book, and then I got an agent, and then we got a publisher. And so this was, I didn't write it to do anything other than just tell a really important story. And so now that we're having these big conversations about movies and different things, it's incredible. And I just want as many people as possible to be exposed to this story, because I always say there's a lot of darkness in the story, but there's much more light.
For
As
sure.
you said, there's tragedy, but there's more triumph.
One more question about your grandmother before we get to your life, which we've been talking about all along. In your life, you played obviously college in America, a short stint with the New York Knicks, ultimately Spain, Israel, but you made a stop in Germany. What was that like, given the conversation we just had about Hungary and surviving and Auschwitz and the Holocaust, and so much of who you are shaped by the cloud of the Holocaust? What was it like telling your grandmother that you were going to play in Germany, and what was it like playing in Germany?
I write in my book, I'm likely the only professional basketball player who had to call his grandmother to ask permission to sign his first contract. And that's true. My agent called me, said, hey, got a great opportunity for you to start your career. Perfect team, perfect league. I said, great. Where am I going? He said, first league, Germany. And as soon as I heard Germany, I really think I interrupted him. I said, hey, I have to call you back.
Yeah.
I called my grandmother right away and just told her, that I had a chance to start my pro career, but it's in Germany. And I'll never forget what she said to me. She said, sons are not responsible for the sins of their fathers. And that's what people have done to Jews over history. They've made assumptions about us. They've blamed us. She said, you can't do that to this generation of Germans. That wasn't their fault. She said, you should go, you should experience the culture, you should have a good time there. And that's what I did. And listen, I was 22, 23 years old. I was very motivated. So a big part of my focus was on the basketball, but I couldn't entirely separate from the history. When we played in Berlin, we visited the memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe. And I remember searching in a database my family's name, and we toured the site of the Nuremberg rallies. And truthfully, there were some folks associated with my team who were older, around my grandmother's age. And I couldn't help but wonder, what were they doing at that time? And so this is the history. And my best friend on my team in Germany, he was a German national team player from Berlin. We were the exact same age. And I was, of course, the only Jewish player on the team, probably the only Jewish player in the league. And, I opened up to him about my grandparents being Holocaust survivors, losing so much family. And he opened up to me that his family was on the other side of the war, and all the guilt and shame that his generation felt from that. Right. And so that perspective taking is really important to to understand and to listen and to, so that was a really, really special opportunity for me to build that bond with him, to relate to him on that level. But it was complicated, right? Playing in Germany was complicated.
Did you experience anti-Semitism in Germany or at any point in your career in Stanford, anywhere?
Not overt, listen, but the truth is, like, I had a teammate once who said, hey, anyone on the team Jewish? I have a really funny joke about a Jew joke. I said, yeah, I am. And it's not funny to me, So in my mind, right, I can say, I didn't experience anti-Semitism. That's anti-Semitism, right? And so, and there are always microaggressions, and I've heard comments made. I never had anything serious happen, but you could argue that even that is serious, because you want to be treated you don't want to be treated that way. In my life, I've seen property in my hometown just defaced with swastikas. I've seen property when I was in business school at Stanford defaced with swastikas. I've experienced those things. I've had people call me names, growing up. And so I don't think you can be Jewish anywhere in the world and not experience anti-Semitism. As an athlete, aside from some of the things that I mentioned, it wasn't really overt or aggressive or anything like that. And again, it's nice to think that the court, the field of competition is a little bit of a safe space in that way.
Yeah, hopefully.
Wow. Is there like an inner circle of Jewish athletes that make it to the top level?
You remember
you guys all friends?
It's a small pamphlet. It's not.
Yeah.
The five of you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm in it. If so, my dad, my dad's one of the really great, legendary Jewish athletes of all time. He was recently inducted into the International Jewish Sports Hall of Fame.
Uh-huh.
I think there are, Mark Spitz.
Mark Spitz, is he friends with him?
Are they friends? I'm not sure
They
if they're friends.
they met each other?
I'd have to ask, but my dad certainly talks about him, right? And even before my dad in basketball, Dolph Shays, and there's a great sense of pride, I think, amongst Jewish people in general when you see a Jewish athlete succeeding, but certainly amongst the Jewish athletes, right? And for me, I know like Ali Raceman, who was an Olympic gymnast, right, is Jewish. You feel it, and you feel real pride for that. And I think in my dad's generation, there are those few athletes, who had a lot of success, and there is a great sense of pride and community there.
You're going through a
Nancy
little bit,
Lieberman, right? Nancy
right?
Lieberman, Lady Magic, a basketball Hall of Famer, is a good example.
Yeah, going through a little renaissance now with it because, first of all, you had the YU Max who went on this incredible run, and Ryan Terrell, who was still trying to break into the NBA. But you had Steinmetz, who Arizona Diamondbacks in baseball. The Yankees just in a deep round in the draft, but the Yankees just drafted an observant Jewish young man. So you have not only Jews, but outwardly observant Jews who are breaking through in sports a little bit. And it's a really, really interesting time. But let's go back, Dan. Let's go back to your college career a little bit, because this really fascinated me, and I'd love to learn more from you about it. So, you're an outstanding athlete in your own right as a young man, but it's your sophomore year at Stanford, and you're having this breakout year. You go from averaging 3 points a game to nearly 18 points a game. Right? That's a huge breakout year. That's a huge improvement. And here you're on the big stage and hoping to make it into the Final Four. Tiger Woods is watching. He's at this game, and you tear your ACL. You go down, and that's a horrible, horrible injury. Again, I'm just a guy who likes to play ball. Several years ago, I tore my Achilles, and surgery, 6 months of coming back. Still haven't been drafted by any team. I'm pretty disappointed. But
the injury did it, man.
That's what happened.
Here you are. Your breakout year from 3 points to 18 points. You're on the cusp of a breakout basketball career, and you tear your ACL and you go down, and you didn't stay down, and you weren't down and out. You came back and you did what was necessary to come back. How did you do that? Where did you draw that strength from, that example from? What did you need to do in order to be able to overcome this obstacle that was put in your way?
Yeah, listen, like you said, I between my sophomore and junior years, I was the most improved player in college basketball. I went from 3.4 points to 18, and I was projected as a potential first round pick in the NBA draft. My dreams were really coming true. Tore my ACL at the end of the year at home, national television. As you mentioned, Tiger was there, but my grandmother was sitting 20 feet away from where I got hurt. And I panicked. Of course, I was rolling around in agony on the floor. And when I finally kind of came to my senses, my grandma was kneeling next to me, rubbing my head.
Wow.
That's all you need to know, right? My grandmother, she survived the Holocaust. She lost a son. She came to America with nothing, not speaking the language, and she built a life. That's what my grandparents went through. My dad came as an immigrant, not speaking the language. He became this legend in the game of basketball after losing his brother. That's my example, and so I mourned my injury, and even to this day, if you bring this up in front of my grandma, she'll say, I don't want to talk about it, because the things she went through can't be compared to what I went through. I had a knee injury. Her family was killed, but this is a disappointment in my life, and so she gave me space to feel it, to mourn it, to own it, but then to move past it, and so, and I had that great example. So listen, there were tears shed, there were moments of doubt, there were moments of disappointment, because we're human, right? And that's what it is. But I had these great examples of what it takes to persevere, what it takes to keep going. And I just put my head down, I worked, and I stayed positive, and it allowed me to come back from that.
It's huge, because so many other people would get stuck, and a lot of people would spend their life saying, what could have been, what would have been, what if, and to not get stuck and paralyzed in that place, but build a beautiful life going forward. And you can't change what happened, but you can determine where you go. I think that's actually one of your grandmother's sayings, right? It's not about what happens to, it's how you respond to what happens to, right? And that's how you responded in that moment.
That's right. And again, I learned these things. These were values that I inherited. These were examples that I was able to witness and to learn from. And again, that they're not without moments of doubt and disappointment and sadness, and because we all do have that part to us as well. But I think that when you come from people who survived the Holocaust, who fought, who just kept fighting for something better, that's what it takes. And I was able to kind of apply that into my situation.
Wow.
Now, it's not a competition, It's not a competition, but in
I
most
already like
ways,
this question, by the way. Wherever this is going, I like it.
it's not a competition, but the basketball accomplishments that your dad has, almost nobody could compete with. But there is one way in which you surpassed your father, right? Your dad won a
I already
silver.
know what it is.
Your dad won the silver at the 73 Maccabiah Games. And in 2009, you won a gold medal at the Maccabiah Games, which I think are taking place actually right now, or they just ended right now in Israel. What did that mean for you, winning that gold medal in Maccabiah Games in Israel? What was that like?
Yeah, it's funny you mention it, right? Because my dad is an Olympic gold medal. Olympic gold medal is a big deal, but we always say, yeah, but I have that Maccabiah gold medal.
Exactly.
He was a senior in high school in '73, and the great Tal Brody and Mickey Berkowitz, some legendary Israeli players, beat my dad's USA team in the gold medal game. Winning gold in Israel was a great experience, but it was even more so than the athletic accomplishment. That was my first time in Israel. And so it was spiritual for me, reconnecting with the Jewish homeland. And as you know from the book, when my dad and our family fled Romania, they had passports for Israel. It was Israel that paid money for Jews to leave communism. And at the last minute, they had a chance to come to the United States. But most of our family ended up in Israel. So there was something so deep and meaningful for me about stepping foot on that soil and feeling it and touring the country and the Western Wall and Haifa and Masada and the Dead Sea. I write in my book, I felt it in my bones, right? So that's what I take more than anything. And I told it was my older sister's first time as well. And I remember saying to her, I'm going to finish my career here. I just felt it. And I did. Last 4 years of my career were in Israel. So that in and of itself was enough for me. The fact that we beat Israel in overtime in the gold medal game and I was the MVP of the comp, like that was all awesome. And I'm really proud of that. And it was a great experience, but it was bigger than that, right? It was about reconnecting for me with the Jewish homeland.
You got to see the beauty of Israel. Unfortunately, Israel is depicted so often as something it's not, this aggressor, this warmonger, apartheid, BDS. Given your time in Israel and given the sort of profile that you and your family have, are you involved in advocating for Israel, trying to set the record straight about Israel, letting people know about the beauty of the real Israel?
Without a doubt. I mean, I think through my book, that's a way that I advocate. And it's all there. It's all in writing. And of course, personally, I speak about it as I am right now. It's a wonderful, beautiful place, meaningful, fun. There's so much to love about the state of Israel. And yeah, I'm very, very open about it.
Still pick up a basketball? You still play?
I say no one wants to watch it happen, but it does happen occasionally. Yeah, I have a group of guys who I enjoy playing with, and you know, there's a switch in there. When you play at that level and it means that much to you, you could always turn it on, but I don't want to anymore, right? I want to enjoy, and you don't want to be too competitive about it. You just want it to be competitive enough. And I have a group of guys who I play with from time to time that I think it's the right mix, right? Because after all those years of grinding and fighting that hard on the court, it doesn't take much to go back to that place. But
Right.
at 38, with you don't want to go back there, right? The only thing that could happen there are more injuries, and I don't want that. So I do enjoy playing, but at the right pace, which
Have
is a
you
slow pace.
you transitioned to other sports? Do you play other things now?
I don't. I should. I always enjoyed playing tennis growing up. I was never a big golfer. So I need to figure something. I think I'll hopefully play tennis as I kind of get older a bit. But I enjoy playing sports. I enjoy watching sports for all the reasons that we've mentioned. I know and I felt what it does for people, the passion that's behind it, the emotion that's behind it, the stories. This is my story, but every athlete who has really just fought and it means so much to them, there's always a reason behind it, right? So I always think it's very interesting to learn what drives athletes, why it matters to them so much.
Well, Dan, thank you for sharing your story with the world. Thank you for joining us behind the
Amazing.
Bima and sharing it with us. And I feel like, given your grandma, and she should live and be well and be healthy
Thank you.
and fast for many, many more Yom Kippurs.
Yeah.
But given your grandmother, your grandparents' history of the Holocaust, given the story through your dad and to you, can't help but end. And the number on the back of your dad's jersey end with Am Yisrael Chai. The Jewish people, really, the Grunfeld story, are alive and well. So thank you so much for joining us behind the Bima. Thank you for letting us listen more into your story with you.
It was great to be here with you both. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was a great conversation, Rabbi Brody.
Wow.
Did you learn about basketball?
I learned a lot about everything. I'll be honest. I didn't know him. I didn't know his father. I did hear of the Knicks because I went to Knicks games when I was growing up, but I was amazed. It's such an incredible story.
What's your takeaway? Lessons learned? What do you got?
I love the part where he spoke about family, just making sure you know your family, your family's history. And he said you don't have to write a book, but you got to speak about it. And when I go to Sinai or some of the assisted livings in the community, there's so many times we hear some of these people talk about the experiences that they had growing up and some incredible stories. I say to them, do your children know these stories? Do your grandchildren, do your great-grandchildren know what you've done with your life?
Yeah. The family narrative, that's what gives us strength, and knowing it is powerful. First of all, I'd love to learn about his grandmother. She should be well. I love that she fasted on Yom Kippur almost 90 times. What is that?
That's great.
Surviving the Holocaust. But what strikes me the most is perseverance, right? Is strength. What strikes me the strongest is the fact that when he was injured, he's lying on the court. Tiger Woods is watching. National game is watching, and his grandmother's holding him, just and basically not judgmentally or critically, but like, buddy, I survived the Holocaust. I lost 70 family members. You're going to get through this. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. So perspective, strength, perseverance, resiliency, coming full circle, right? The Maccabi, like unbelievable, winning the gold. State of Israel.
There was no state of Israel. There was no.
Yeah, Hapoel Holon saving her life, and her grandson is playing basketball. State of Israel, Hatikva, Maccabi again. What a wow!
It's inspiring.
Emotional, beautiful, great night. It really was a great conversation, and so glad that he joined us for it. And it's a book worth checking out. We are nearing the 100th episode. We want to share your impressions. Nothing to do with us. This is not our ego. Our guests. We've had amazing guests, men and women, and Jewish and non-Jewish, and religious and not religious. We've had amazing, amazing guests. Leave us a message at 561-247-4757, 561-247-4757, or email behindthebima@gmail.com. Let us know your favorite guest, your favorite moment, your favorite remark in an interview, what did something for you. For that 100th episode, we want to be able to reflect back both on that and Rabbi Brody's wardrobe changes.
Are they able to leave a message that if it's a great message,
that's how it works. Leave a message at that number.
Right.
And then we'll play that message.
Yeah.
Play that message. So make sure it's appropriate. Leave a message. Favorite moment. We're excited. We're looking forward. Most importantly, we're looking forward. We hope it can work out to be reunited, all the hosts together again. That would be great.
The biggest hope.
That would be the biggest hope. So anyway, thank you to Dan Grunfeld. Thank you, Rabbi Brody, for being back. Garth Brooks, thank you for being here.
Big year this year. I just wanted to tell you, I'm so excited. I've never been more pumped for a year. So,
I wanted to get into that. I guess we'll have to do it next week.
Next time.
Every year, Rabbi Brody comes back for the summer on fire. This is going to be the year. I got plans. I got lists. I got ideas. And I want to know, what is it about the summer? What creates that margin or space that you're able to dream? What reignites that fire that makes you come back? So for next week, Rabbi Brody, here's your homework. We're going to talk about it. When you come back on fire and you have all these dreams and plans, you ever stop and measure and say, did I accomplish them? Did I achieve them? Did I make it happen?
Yeah.
Or is it just like you have them and you run with them? And what is it that enables you to have those dreams, that fire, to run with it? And how could other people find that inspiration and run with it and move with it? All that next week.
And more.
And more. I'm Behind the Bima. Until next time, stay happy. Stay